The differences between red states and blue states in America is so distinct that they could be two different countries, with wildly diverging views of why government exists and who counts as American. Their ideologies are grounded in different versions of American history, endorsing irreconcilable visions of patriotism and national identity. These are issues that my next guest is quite critical of. Richard Slotkin is an Emeritus Olin Professor of English and American Studies at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. His most recent book, A Great Disorder, National Myth and the Battle for America, was published by Harvard University Press, and a copy of it can be accessed on the link that I'm going to paste right in the description panel on the upload for this video. We spoke earlier this morning. Enjoy the show. Professor Richard Slotkin, thank you so much for making the time. I'm happy to have you. I know you're a busy man, but thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, right, I understand, it's been about 15 years. You've had a very illustrious career. You have written quite a lot of novels, a lot of books, a lot of articles. I want to understand something. It's 15 years after you've left the job, but you
Yes.
still write. What is it that keeps you motivated to write, when you are no longer actively an academic?
I love writing, and I love my subject. And retiring from teaching just means that I have more time to write and to engage with the things that interest me. I think writing with me is just like an instinct, like a musician has to play music. I just have to do it. And the other thing is that with this book particularly, I felt that the cultural war crisis that the country is going through was something to which I could make a discussion to which I could make a contribution, given my background in that field.
Right, that is great. So now I want you to tell me a bit about yourself so that our audience can get to know you. So what is it that you taught during your your days? I don't know how many years you served, but I understand you got your PhD in 1967, right? That's a very long time.
I started teaching in 1966.
Okay.
Okay,
But,
so I've been teaching. I've been doing this research about American cultural history, and particularly the history of American national mythology since my graduate student days in 1964. Really, the work began. So for about 45 years, I taught American Studies at Wesleyan University, which is a small liberal arts university in Connecticut. And for me, American Studies was interdisciplinary, a combination of literature, history, and film. I taught film for many years. And my focus really was on the way in which popular culture, in all its forms, which would include literature, the way popular culture gives insight into the political unconscious, the way in which the culture creates its political ideas.
That's great. So I understand again, before we get into the book, I understand you write both novels and scholarly academic stuff,
Yes.
Non-fictional stuff, if I can say.
Yes.
Is there any connection between what you write, like the fictional stuff, and the non-fictional stuff?
Totally.
Okay.
My fiction is historical fiction, and I've actually written an article about this called "Fiction for the Purposes of History." And briefly, what I found is that when you write about history, there's a kind of abstraction process that goes on necessarily to understand a process. But if you then try to imagine, you can test your ideas by trying to imagine what it would be like for someone to live a life in terms of those ideas and structures that you've been analyzing. So, for example, my first novel was about a Civil War battle, the Battle of the Crater, which involved race and violence, which are my two themes. What would it be like to be immersed as a Black person, as a white person, as an immigrant in a world shaped by the concepts of race and domination and so on that I had that analytical history shows us is part of that worldview. And so I did that. And the book was actually used as a textbook in a history course.
Oh, nice, nice.
So I did well with that. And that's the way it's been for me. I've tended to alternate between writing a scholarly book and then writing a work of fiction that uses some element of the scholarship that couldn't be handled with, couldn't be handled with footnotes, that had to be seen subjectively from the inside.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for highlighting that. So now I want you to take me through the core ideas of the book.
Okay.
And what you consider to be the central argument.
Okay, there are basically four key ideas. The first is that the creation of a national myth is an essential structure for establishing and maintaining a modern nation state. The second is that, well, I trace the history of the major myths that have shaped American nationality. And then third, I show how these myths have become, instead of the basis of national unity, have become the banners of opposing sides in the culture war. And the last point is that the consequence of this is to say that the culture wars are deeply rooted in American history, not easily resolved by political compromise, and that they presage a potential breakdown in the American political system.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. So now, what contribution does the book make to the conventional discourse, on American culture, American identity, the discourse you engage in? What are the scholarly works that you are in conversation with?
Okay, there are a couple of things that I could point to. First, the whole basic question of what is national myth a thing? Does it function? How does it function? What is the significance of its function in shaping the culture and particularly in shaping politics? And I think I make a very strong argument that it does shape politics. The second thing that the book does is it traces the historical roots of this mythology. And what's critical about that is that each myth is a historical script. When you appeal to a myth, you're appealing to this script and you're invoking it as a model for action. So I'll give you an example, which I think is widely understood. One of the myths I talk about is called the Good War, World War II, in which a nation which was divided by race and ethnicity unites to fight totalitarian and racist enemy power, and in so doing redeems itself and the world. It's the myth of the Good War. And the myth says that if you appease a dictator, the dictator will attack and you'll eventually have to fight anyway. But when all these different peoples form together and unite to fight the dictator, a world transformation is possible. Okay, that's World War II. So the North Koreans invade South Korea in 1950. Well, we understand this. It's like Hitler invading the Rhineland. It's World War II again. Vietnam. If we appease the communists advancing in Vietnam, then they'll want the rest of the world. We'll have World War III. Then let's go to 2001. The attack on the World Trade Center.
9/11.
President Bush says it's like Pearl Harbor. I know what movie I'm in. I'm in a World War II movie, and I know what my next step must be, which is to fight a war. And then let's go to Iraq, 2002. The Bush administration says that Saddam Hussein is Hitler,
Mm-hmm.
and this Hitler is going to have an atomic bomb. Do I know what movie I'm in? I know what movie I'm in. It's World War II. I know I have to unify the world and attack. Okay. And so that's how myth works. You have a historical crisis that has been reduced to a powerful story, well understood by everyone. And you can appeal to that story as a model to interpret a new crisis and to suggest a response to that crisis. And then the last point is, eventually this myth fails. Ukraine is attacked. At first, everyone says, I understand the movie. It's Hitler. It's World War II. And then people say, wait a minute. You fooled me with Vietnam. You fooled me with Iraq. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're fooling me again. And so instead of a positive response, a skeptical response. Because the last thing to say about myth is every time you use it, you test it. And that is what makes history, gives the myth a history, allows the myth to evolve, to change, to rise in power, to fall in power. Basically,
Wonderful.
That's the idea.
That's
how the system works.
That's wonderful. I love how you explain it. So now, looking at the book, I want you to give me some specific examples, maybe drawing upon, the chapters that you engage. What are the major findings of the book?
Well, the major, I guess I should say first, before, what are for the major findings to be clear, I have to say what the four major myths are.
Wonderful.
That are, and why, and how, and then how these are in play. So the four myths, a myth forms out of a historical crisis, which the dimensions of which are so profound that they touch issues that will never go away, that will always be part of the way the country evolves. So there are really four major groups of myths. One is called the myth of the frontier. It's about we're a settler state. We were colonial at the beginning. The whole history of the first part of our history is westward expansion. And from this myth, we get the idea of a special American capitalism, that we become wealthy by exploiting abundant natural resources. That's the real source of wealth, not labor, not capital, but nature, resources. And that this is inexhaustible. It never ends. And the second piece of that is that we define our character as white, European, fighting, non-white, primitive, savage. And so racial exclusion is an original element of the American identity, and violence associated with that. Second myth, the myth of the founding. The idea that the nation was put together by a group of extraordinarily brilliant white men who defined the fundamental structures of government and the fundamental values of government and produced two holy texts, Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And the way to think about them is that they are the first attempt to resolve the basic problem of American government, which is how do you form a Republican government and a just society and one people out of a society that contains many different races and ethnicities. Okay. Third, Civil War. This is the big one because this has three variants. And these are what we're living with. Whenever a commentator starts Civil War, it's going to be one of these three stories. The liberation. Lincoln is the hero. Liberation of the slaves and the saving of democracy from an armed overthrow by the secessionists. Second, the white reunion. Oh, the war was just a war between white brothers. Never mind the black people. We're cool with each other now. And the third one, the most important right now, the lost cause, the Southern myth, the Confederate myth, which says that extreme violence is justified to either either defend or to reestablish white Christian supremacy. And that was the doctrine that shaped the Southern overthrow of Reconstruction and the establishment of the Jim Crow system of one-party rule, very important, and racial violence that dominated American history for basically 100 years, from about 1870 to 1970. It controlled half the country. The fourth, the last one, the Good War, which I've already talked about. But what's extraordinary about the Good War is it's the first time that the American people is represented as a multiracial, multi-ethnic conglomerate, rather than a pure white society. And so that is in many ways the core of the modern liberal myth. But notice that, like all the other myths, it is connected to violence. Okay, so those are the four myths. And then if you want to see how it's operating in the culture, which is the point of my book, it's really an exercise in decoding. Remember, if you can, the January 6th riot at the Capitol, the insurrection, the flags that are flying. You've got the face of Donald Trump on the flag. Okay, we understand that. But then you have what I call the Betsy Ross flag, the Revolutionary War flag with the stars in a circle, and what's called the Gadsden flag, which is the yellow flag with a rattlesnake on it. Don't tread on me. Okay. The Betsy Ross flag says, we are American revolutionaries. It's the myth of the founding. The Gadsden flag is particularly the flag of the gun rights movement. I'll get to what that's about, but it basically says that the Second Amendment guarantees people the right to arm themselves against the government. So that's two myths of the founding. Coonskin hat, cowboy hat, is the myth of the frontier. So we're talking here not only about the absence of regulation, that freedom in that sense. We're talking about vigilantism, the right of people to use their own weapons to enforce the law. And the third one, the most important, is the Confederate battle flag, the stars and bars, the blue cross with the stars on a red field. That's the lost cause. What is it? What is the country that we are saving by taking up our Second Amendment rights and our Revolutionary War rights and storming the government? We are reestablishing white Christian male dominance. And that is saving civilization. There's another flag that goes with that, which has recently become prominent, which is the one that was flying at Alito's house, the Appeal to Heaven flag, which is a flag of Christian nationalism. And there's another one, which is a white flag with a blue field and a red cross in it. That's a different framework from what I'm talking about. These are all appeals to the founding, the frontier, and the lost cause. And those are the basic elements of the MAGA mythology.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. So what can we say are the major lessons of this book?
Well, I think there are a few. One is that the issues in the culture war are not ephemeral issues that could easily be resolved by some economic measure that would raise people's incomes or something. They can't be resolved. They're deeply rooted in American history. They appeal to fundamental values and fundamental oppositions of value, and they have real historical precedent for them. So that the people who invoke these principles feel that they're riding a wave of history. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the effect of this war of myths, this culture war, is to paralyze the national government so that it cannot take political action to ameliorate any of the grievances the real grievances that do underlie the public discontent. So that discontent only gets worse. The third point is people talk about the possibility of civil war, and I think that's not valid. But what we will have is what I call a culture war between the states. And war between the states is one of the synonyms for civil war, in which conservative states and liberal states have completely different and really hostile legal regimes on public health, abortion, taxation, election rules, racial equality, gender and sexuality, and critical to me, the teaching of American history. So that if this goes on, children in Florida will be living in a different America, historically speaking, from the children who are educated in California and New York. And I think that's critical. Fourth, there will inevitably be a rise in political violence. And this goes to the gun rights movement. And the way in which gun rights ideology is in a way a nexus for all of the mythologies that drive MAGA. But in any case, the point of it is that violence, people are believing that violence is justified. It's justified as a Revolutionary War principle. It's justified because the Second Amendment supposedly gives us our guns so we can defend our rights. Because we are a lost cause fighting for a lost America, and Trump is our hero. We are entitled to use violence to defend him. So what you will get, I think, is sporadic violence, terrorist type violence, the violence by right-wing militias, depending on who wins the election, how that will go. Violence committed against protesters if the right wins. And last, the last point in the book that I'd make is that as this culture war plays out, MAGA and the right have an advantage over the left because the myths to which they appeal are traditional and well understood and have a very clear storyline. To what do the left appeal? They appeal to Lincoln. Think of Martin Luther King at the Lincoln Memorial and the liberation version of the Civil War. They appeal to the good war, but that one is complicated by the fact that you're also appealing to war. And people, that is a problem with it. And the third thing is that the left is a reform movement, which whose ideology depends on a critique of American history with regard to race, the dispossession of the indigenous people, the use of social violence, and so on. It's difficult to move from critique to storytelling. It's one of the reasons why I write novels, to show that it is possible to move, to use your analytical skill, and then to say, but yet I have a story to tell. And unless the left has a story to tell, it will be at a disadvantage in the story wars. What you will have, what the left has to offer instead is a list of policy proposals. But what is the rationale for those proposals? What I talk about in the book is that there are two historical crises which have never been mythologized as the lost cause has, for example. The New Deal. Name me a movie about labor organizers operating during the New Deal. Where is that movie? It never was made. And the last one is the Civil Rights Movement, which has its kind of mythology. If I say Martin Luther King, or if I say I say as a member of let's say as a Latino, why don't we follow the pattern of the Southern Christian leadership? You know what I mean? Everyone knows what I mean. But it never became a national myth, something which unites everyone and connects directly to a national political program. Instead, it became a myth for different identity groups to rationalize and organize their own striving for rights. So that so what needs to happen, I think, for the left is the integration of Lincoln, the New Deal, the civil rights movement as a continuous story of how a nation, multi-ethnic, multiracial from the beginning, makes a single coherent society, democratic society, out of those divergent elements.
Wonderful. That's so interesting. Before I get to the last question, I have a small follow-up I have for you.
Okay.
I always have issues with when we write the history about the history of a country and anything. There's this debate or this discussion about patriotism and patriotic history.
Yes.
Most of our leaders today would want to see an academic community that writes the history and that writes anything, at least that moves a nation towards patriotic ideals and all that. So would we say mythologizing some of these American key historical events, key historical experiences, do you see it as patriotic?
Oh, yes. That's why I quoted that poem by Adrienne Rich at the beginning, where she says, a patriot is not a missile. A patriot is one who struggles for her country as she struggles for her own soul.
Okay.
And a patriot takes the country personally. What happens to the country personally, and struggles to make it better. One of the premises of the American myth that comes out of both the founding and the frontier is the idea that America is an exception to world history. The critical historian says, no, it's not an exception, that the history of injustice and cruelty and violence, which we see in every other country in the world, is our history as well. It has its special forms, but generically it's the same thing. What is the difference? What is the basis of patriotism? The base is that from the beginning, important elements in American society, sometimes even amounting to a majority, have struggled against those injustices, have struggled against oppression, have pointed to racism or racial inequality as a violation of God's law, as a violation of the law, as a violation of common sense. It's the history of struggle, which is the history that a patriot can identify with, because the struggle has an aim in view, which, as I said, is to create a single society, a single people, feeling itself, that is to say, people feeling themselves belonging to a community with a common set of interests, so that a harm to one is harm to all. To build such a community out of the most divergent elements of religion, race, ethnicity, cultural background, national origin in the world, to build a single society out of that. And the thing that Americans forget is that it was that way from the start. It's true that at the beginning, we didn't have the immigration from Asia and Southern Europe that we had later on. But the very first colonies, you've got different ethnic groups from England that were Scots, Irish, Welsh, different nations really within a nation, French, Spanish, Black, Africans of every different, West African at least, ethnicity, indigenous peoples living in the same social frame, but not living together, not living as one people, framing laws that exclude some, include others, and that gradually expand to include more and more. But it's there from the start. The story is there from the start, and it can be told in those terms.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. So now, what is the target audience of this book? Who do you think would greatly benefit if they had to get their hands on this book?
Okay. Of course, the academic audience that I've addressed all my life, but I really hope for this book a larger audience. I would say any American who is historically literate, politically engaged, and the readers of the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Atlantic, anyone who engages with the politics at the level almost of mass culture, I would hope could read the book with benefit and understand what the book has to offer.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Richard Slotkin. Viewers and listeners, those of you who would want to buy this book, you can access it by clicking the link that is right in the description panel on the upload for this video. Thank you so much, Professor Richard. I hope you have a good day.
Same to you.
That is
I
wonderful.
look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.